All right. This is your Gaza War Sit Rep Day 211. And situation is a little complicated to say no end in sight, not as an introductory statement anyway. So that is why I'm here tonight, because this is the end of a long day where with a lot of very promising statements about a ceasefire that ended in not a ceasefire. So, in the past, over the course of the day, there was an announcement, I think probably from Egypt, saying we're hours away from a deal. Then there was a headline that said Hamas agrees to a document. I guess the Egyptians presented a paper, Hamas agreed to it. And then the Israelis went around and said, no, we do not agree to an end to the war. So Hamas was basically saying there's all kinds of details about when prisoners will be released, right? This is where Hamas always says they show a lot of flexibility and they believe in being flexible. They're not flexible on an end to the war, return to their homes in the north, aid, an end to the siege and reconstruction. They those are their bottom line. And Israel, etc., says that those are delusional and um, they want to do a deal that enables them to continue the war. Well, that's not a deal. So the war continues. Now, Hamas signed a deal. I guess they tried to show some flexibility in the sense of saying you don't have to call it a ceasefire. We can have a phased deal. We're okay with not calling it a ceasefire at the beginning as long as it leads to a ceasefire or something. I mean, their objective is an end to the war so that people can go home and begin reconstruction. And that is not agreed to by Israel. And given so, what is going to happen tomorrow? There's going to be another round of negotiations. So, let me just talk around a few other things. The resistance group out of Bahrain, Soraya al-Ashtar, has done another attack. I think the Iraqis did another attack as well on the port of Eilat. There are announcements from the resistance in Gaza of various attacks on Israeli troops in the Netzarim corridor. But there's a series of events that have also happened over the past couple days that I don't know what they mean. So just put them together. I'll just put them together and talk through what they could mean. But there's a lot that I don't think I understand yet. And I don't know whether they add up to one thing or they're opposite. Let me say what I mean. China, as I reported the other day, brokered talks between Hamas and Fatah leaders. Fatah being the group that's in charge of the Palestinian Authority, the PA. So immediately after China kind of had that talk, and there were some promising things coming out of that, of future unity of Hamas and Fatah, then the Palestinian Authority assassinated an important resistance leader. And then over the course of today, Israel invaded Al-Ghusun. There's a camp near Tulkarem where the PA assassinated the leader the other day and killed three more resistance fighters, invading with a bulldozer and heavy equipment and tons of soldiers and using shoulder-launched missiles. They took the bodies, they beheaded one of the bodies, they killed several innocent people. I mean, I don't like to use that term. They killed people that they weren't even trying to kill, I guess you could say. They killed collateral people that they killed more than the three people they said they went in to kill. I don't know how else to put that. I I don't believe that a settler colonial genocidal entity can't makes distinctions between innocent and guilty. I think it's almost insulting to use terms like innocent and guilty because it implies that Israel should have the power of life and death over the guilty, which they don't. They shouldn't. They have no there's no right, there's no court that could determine that they were guilty so that Israel could kill them. So anyway, just over explaining my slippage into the use of the word innocent. Israel invaded, they assassinated three more people, they killed several other people, and they defiled and took the bodies. They did that all it, after China managed to sort of broker this optimistic negotiation or talks between Hamas and Fatah. So that's one follow up. I also mentioned that Turkey announced that they weren't going to do any more trade with Israel. And I said I didn't believe that. I don't know, I haven't followed up to the point where I would know whether they have actually, whether anything has changed as a result of that announcement. But I did feel there was something to the fact that immediately after Turkey announced that, Yemen and Ansarallah announced the so-called fourth phase of their um, operation against Israel, where they're saying so the third phase, the previous phase was they said they're going to start attacking ships in the Indian Ocean if they're going to or from Israel. The phase before that was they're attacking ships going in and out of the Bab al Mandab and not just Israel, but other ships that were helping Israel, and then the Red Sea. And the first phase was just targeting ships that were going to Israel, that were kind of passing Yemen through the Bab el Mandab and into the Red Sea. So now the fourth phase is they're attacking ships going to Israel via the Mediterranean. So this is amounts almost to a full blockade of Israel that the Yemenis, I mean, we'll see to what extent they can impose such a thing, given um, the size of the world and the size of the region and everything that we're talking about here. But they're they're saying, okay, just so to look at the map, initial phase was if you're trying to reach Israel through the Red Sea, Ansarallah will target your ships, maybe take them over. They took over the Galaxy Leader. That was the very first thing they did. And then they have been attacking warships, American naval ships, British and others that have also attacked them and bombed Yemen. Then they went out as far as the Gulf of Aden. They attacked ships that are supporting Israel, not just Israeli ships. Then they went out into the Indian Ocean and said, anybody going to Israel this way is going to come under attack from Yemen. Then the fourth phase is anyone trading with Israel via the Mediterranean Sea will come under attack. I'm not exactly sure how they will do this given the distances involved, but they feel confident that they announced this. Now, what I think is coincidental about this is the big Muslim country that trades with Israel via the Mediterranean Sea is, of course, Turkey. A lot of Israel's food, a lot of Israel's things come from Turkey. And with Turkey announcing that they're not trading with Israel anymore, and immediately Yemen announcing that they're going to attack other ships that are going to Israel. So presumably this is like Western Europe ships that engage in all kinds of trade with Israel that will now come under targeting from Ansarallah. I don't know. I don't know that there was coordination, but Yemen now can do this without targeting a fellow Muslim country. So it just seems too close in timing to be a coincidence. The pier, the near completion of the US pier, as John and I talked about in the last sit rep, combined tonight with apparently exceptionally heavy bombing of Rafah. So bombing directly of the refugees of Gaza that are all gathered in Rafah in tents, and lots of posturing as if they're going to attack Rafah. The politicians saying we're attacking Rafah no matter what. Rafah, Rafah, here we come. The pro-Israeli protesters chanting that at the students. They're chanting to the students that you can't stop us from going to Rafah. So lots of proud genocidal people in all over North America chanting for the genocide, which is always quite a thing to see. But so all of these events that we're following up, how do we put it all together? And I've seen on Twitter people saying, okay, look, they were waiting for the pier to be completed so that they can do the ethnic cleansing of the people. They could push them north instead of pushing them into Egypt, which Egypt is not going to accept. They're going to push them into the sea, and the US is going to take them somewhere. And John Elmer said the other day, the Palestinians aren't going to get on the boat. And some of you responded to that in the comments, but I have the same take on this as I have a lot of these proposals. Israel can make all kinds of plans. They made plans to ethnically cleanse people into Rafah. Now, maybe they do want to cleanse people via the sea, but they have to win the war first, as we always say on these sit reps. They have to win the war first, and they haven't won the war yet. So I don't see, I think the people that are seeing the pier as a ethnic cleansing pier, it could be the plan, but lots of plans have come and gone. Remember the plan to flood the tunnels? Remember the plan to gas the tunnels? Remember the plan to go into the tunnels at all? Remember the plan to go and invade Lebanon? Remember the plan to go and attack Iran? So there are lots of plans that continue to not be implemented, and this is a plan that depends on winning the war, having won the war to work. Maybe we'll see, maybe this is what they were working towards, and we'll see them continue to work towards it. Now, the flip side is people who are really optimistic that these talks are going to lead to a ceasefire because whether it's the campus protests or the expansion of operations or Israel figuring out that they're not going to be able to expand the war into Lebanon or war with Iran. Maybe the ICC warrants or the fear of them or some other back channels pressure is going to result in a ceasefire. I don't think Israel is ready for a ceasefire yet. So Israel will fight as long as they think they can win, and their sense that they can win is continues to be based on their belief, their self-belief as Superman rather than on military reality. And that translates to reality in the form of not being able to agree to a ceasefire tomorrow or the next day or however long this round of negotiations lasts. If I'm wrong, we will be back to talk about it on a sit rep. We might analyze this a bit more tomorrow or in the coming days. But what I'm saying right now tonight is that I don't think Israel is ready for a ceasefire. On the other hand, the talks are an indication that Israel is coming closer to Hamas's conditions. Hamas made those conditions many months ago, and Israel said they were delusional and came back and at various points came close to agreeing to them. And then negotiators leaked the news that Netanyahu was scuttling the talks himself and taking authority away from the negotiators. And now we have another round. So every round of negotiations is one in which the Israelis know exactly what Hamas wants for a ceasefire and comes close to agreeing and then walks away. So we have to think that one of these rounds, at some point, Israel will have felt that they have suffered enough militarily that they will have felt what many of us who are assessing this military situation have concluded, which is that they cannot win this militarily, and that they therefore have to have a negotiated end to the war. But I don't think that's going to happen this round. This, uh, when it does happen, it'll end anticlimactically with an unsatisfying deal, and then probably many other dramatic events will follow. It is when you think of all the dramatic events that will follow, under what circumstances will the front with Lebanon close with Hezbollah? Under what circumstances will Ansarallah stand down? They've all promised that they'll stand down if the aggression in Gaza stops, but what'll happen in the West Bank? What'll happen domestically in Israel? These are all very, 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 very distant from what's being negotiated at the table over Gaza right now. And yet they are all absolutely playing into the presence or absence of a deal or of negotiations in the first place. What's going to happen on the campuses? I mean, we have to see. So when I was trying to figure out how that's it for the news segment. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the apartheid system might end. And that'll be our little lecture for today for the next 10 minutes or so. When I was trying to figure out how the Israel-Palestine conflict, as it's sometimes called, is going to end, I mean, you can look at the Battle of Algiers and study the Algerian conflict, but the other one to study is apartheid, South African apartheid. How did South African apartheid end? And South African apartheid ended through a negotiation. There was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that followed, and then a single democratic state for everybody. That's how apartheid ended in South Africa. So that's also the so-called one state solution, that the one state solution people want for Palestine. They want a one democratic state for Palestine where everybody lives together, Jews and Muslims and Christians, everybody lives there together, like white people and colored people and black people and Africans, all of the different color statuses that existed in apartheid South Africa. Everybody is just a South African now. So the thing is, apartheid, the ending of apartheid was very interesting, and it is worthy of study. And when you start studying it, you have a hard time not just getting sucked into studying it on its own merits. There are some phenomenal documentaries on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was televised. So there are hours and hours of Truth and Reconciliation Commission footage that you can actually watch, that South Africans watched night after night while it was happening. I watched quite a few hours of it. There's a book called Country of My Skull, which goes through a narrative of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And there's a book called Apartheid, Guns and Money by Henny van Vuren, which I've just read. I didn't read it all. It's incredibly detailed about apartheid and the end of apartheid. But it is pretty fascinating to see the similarities. And so I just want to list a couple of these similarities, or a couple of things that were very striking to me about apartheid South Africa towards the end. There was a secret society called the Broderbund. So South Africa had a white supremacist party called the National Party, and there was a secret society called the Broderbund, and all white. So I'm reading from Van Buren's book, Apartheid, Guns and Money, chapter 1, subsection called Behind the Scenes Brothers in Arms. The invisible hand that directed the National Party was the Broderbund, an all-white patriarchal secret society established in 1918. Balfour Declarations, 1917. It was originally intended as a society working for the economic, social, and political upliftment of white Afrikaners following the end of the South African War. In time, it grew to a membership of over 12,000 hand-picked individuals organized in over 800 cells across the country. It could count among its members every prime minister and president between 1948 and 1994. D.F. Malan to F.W. de Klerk. In addition, most cabinet members, military generals, heads of Afrikaans-speaking universities, and the South African Broadcasting Corporation were Broders. They were augmented by leaders in business, the clergy, teachers, and other members of the new elite. What had started as a welfare organization was, by the second half of the 20th century, the organization at the center of the apartheid machinery. The Broderbund was obsessed with total secrecy. Members were required to swear a solemn oath to eternal secrecy, even if they were expelled or resigned. They used the influence. So they normalized. So Van Buren's thing is like it was a secret organization, and it instilled secrecy into everything that they did in white South Africa apartheid power system. He said it normalized the practice of quashing the truth within the echelons of power. It should therefore be no surprise that its activities and modus operandi began to infect the rest of the white establishment. The book, Apartheid, Guns and Money, is about the international system that was designed at the top levels of South Africa to work with all the Western countries, America, Britain, even Russia to some extent, not to a large extent, but he does it. He has a chapter about how there were some unfortunate ties even between the Soviet Union and even between the People's Republic of China in the 80s and South Africa, despite they also those countries also worked against apartheid and against the West, but he unearths some very unknown, I guess, connections. But what he's mostly talking about is banking, Belgium, oil companies, the Western oil companies, gold, the way that apartheid South Africa would trade gold. So everybody, their apartheid, the gold that they were able to spread around all over the global economy and made it very easy for them to circumvent sanctions. There were sanctions on South Africa. Arms trade to South Africa was banned. So getting around that, getting South Africa to have all the weapons to fight their neighbors, and was a big priority for South Africa, and they had to do it by this secret system, by working through secret financial channels and big corporations and the state, the arms corporation of the state, Arms Corps, which had all kinds of secret deals with arms manufacturers in the West and banks in the West and oil companies. And this whole system also included them marketing their weapons, which they developed or modified locally, as battle tested, because they were using the weapons against South Africa's neighbors. So if that reminds you of something, the whole West helped hide the money. Crime was systemic. Organized crime was systemic, which is also the case for Israel. And the system continued after. The other point that I wanted to make about this comparison between Israel and apartheid South Africa is that I believe that the white establishment of South Africa at the time and all of the apartheid supporters at the time absolutely understood the similarities and the connections between South Africa and Israel, apartheid South Africa and Israel. So when South Africa was negotiating the end of apartheid, then that was when Israel was negotiating the Oslo Accords. And just like Israel tried to undermine the Oslo Accords, the South African apartheid regime also tried to poison the post-apartheid system. And they just were a whole lot less successful about it than Israel happened to be. And that was the relative power structures were different. But the reason I think that the elites of the West understood this is not just the timing of Oslo and the end of South Africa and those negotiations in the early 90s. It's also things like you guys, if you guys have never heard of United Nations Resolution 3379, because you guys think it's edgy to say that Zionism is racism, right? This is something that you that gets it's probably literally illegal in the United States now to say that. Um, they passed a bill. I don't know. Maybe it has to pass the Senate, but there was a United Nations resolution, Resolution 3379, at the General Assembly, which was passed with 72 votes in favor, 35 against, and 32 abstentions. November 10th, 1975, which basically stated that Zionism is racism, determines that Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. And this was, this is the text of the resolution. It cites the resolution of 1963, the United Nations Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Any doctrine of racial differentiation or superiority is scientifically false, morally condemnable, socially unjust, and dangerous. And then they said that international cooperation and peace require the achievement of national liberation and independence, the elimination of colonialism and neocolonialism, foreign occupation, Zionism, apartheid, and racial discrimination in all its forms, as well as the recognition of the dignity of peoples and their right to self-determination. So there was a session at the Organization of African Unity in 1975, which they said, so they're citing a couple of declarations that happened in 1975, one in Mexico City and then this one in Kampala, Uganda, which considered that the racist regime in occupied Palestine and the racist regime in Zimbabwe and South Africa have a common imperialist origin, forming a whole and having the same racist structure and being organically linked in their policy aimed at repression of the dignity and integrity of the human being. So that's Resolution 3379. And it was revoked, you guys. It was revoked in December of 1991. So the US had just destroyed Iraq, and fresh from destroying Iraq, the US put up a resolution to revoke the designation of Zionism as a form of racism. And it was 111 voted for, 25 voted against. So this is the collapse of the Soviet Union, the collapse of the destruction of Israel, and I mean the destruction of Iraq, not the destruction of Israel, and the repeal of Resolution 3379. And now it's like it never existed. Let me know in the comments if you had heard of Resolution 3379, United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3379, which declared Zionism to be a form of racism. Because I can tell you, I do not believe that at the highest levels of the US elites and the Israeli elites and the people that support Israel, I know they did not forget this. The Israeli prime minister or president at the time took the resolution and ripped it in half. The American Daniel Patrick Moynihan made a speech that the United Nations had codified anti-Semitism, so they went pretty ballistic when it happened, and and they got it revoked 16 years later after destroying Iraq. So that is an interesting history, and I think that the way that the sanctions worked on South Africa, the the way that the elite decided to negotiate the end of apartheid, and the way that they found um, democracy to actually ruin everything that they felt that they had worked so hard for their racially exclusive regime. I think that there's a lot more investment in not letting Israel go the way that South Africa was lost and the way that Algeria was lost. And so I think in some ways the fervor of the and the violence of the police and the violence of the pro-Israel protesters and the unhinged nature of the reactions towards protesters, anti-genocide protesters all over North America and the world is is partly motivated by like the desire to not lose Israel the way they lost South Africa and the way they lost Algeria. There's another story. There's one more story related to this, which is the Durban Conference on Racism in 2000, which also like pro-Israel people in a very organized way attacked that conference as a hotbed of anti-Semitism. So the United Nations, after the independence movements of Africa in the 1960s, and all of those countries joined the UN, they wanted to address racism, they wanted to address apartheid, and they wanted to address Zionism. And they understood it all as a singular system that had to be overthrown. And it was, um, it was they forced them to repeal the resolution in 1991. And of course, the destruction of Iraq was a big part of it. And the Oslo Accords, the negotiations that were going on with the Palestinian Authority after the first Intifada also played into it. You can never be, as we've said before, about, for example, Syria in 1991, you can't be more Palestinian than the Palestinians. So if the Palestinian Liberation Organization is negotiating in 1990, 91, then the United Nations isn't gonna isn't gonna vote. United Nations countries aren't gonna vote that Zionism is racism if they see that the Palestinian Liberation Organization is willing to back off of this in exchange for recognition and so on. So that's a bit of an oversimplification of what actually happened, but the timing can tell you something about how those factors played into what happened with Resolution 3379. But there was a World Conference Against Racism in Durban, I believe in 2000, and they were trying to reactivate some of this stuff in post-apartheid South Africa. And once again, it was it was the idea of the systematic analysis that is put forward in Resolution 3379 was very much came under attack. by pro-Israel forces at Durban and after. So if you look at news coverage at the time of Durban, you can see a real panic about the World Conference Against Racism. And I think what they feared was another resurrection of Resolution 3379 and the inclusion of Zionism among other forms of racism, which was, once again, just to repeat one more time, between 1975 and 1991, it was recognized by the United Nations General Assembly that Zionism was a form of racism, co-terminus and born of the same imperialism as apartheid and racism and colonialism. So you can imagine that the powers that be want to fight this last one, tooth and nail, and they are not going to give it up easily. And that is very much what we're seeing now. And that is why I don't think tomorrow is going to be a breakthrough, but I hope it is. I hope I'm wrong. As I've said many times, I hope I'm wrong. And I will be back to talk about it, especially if I'm wrong. If I'm not wrong, I'll be back anyway. So hang in there. Like and subscribe and comment, and I will see you in the next one.